Welcome in to Daily Faceoff Live, your go-to source for everything hockey. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
We survived awards night. We barely. Though,
I got splattered.
Yeah. Welcome into a June 27th edition of Daily Faceoff Live. As always, brought to you by Betano. The game starts now at betano.ca. Latest draft odds up now, and they have a lot of them. We'll dig into a few more later on in the show. Pete Blackburn's going to stop by as well. But first, let's throw 2 minutes and 30 seconds up on the clock, Frank, and start with what we got yesterday. Finally, a trade. You broke it sitting right here
in this chair
on Oilers Nation every day. It was quite something. The Boston Bruins find a way to offload Taylor Hall. UFA rights to Nick Foligno go to Chicago as well. He's got a 1-year, $4 million deal with the Blackhawks now as of this morning. Back the other way, a couple of small pieces go to Boston, but the big thing for the Bruins is that they got out of the cap space. And now the question is, what's next in Boston?
Yeah, I think everyone's circling around the Bruins right now, trying to understand, okay, it seems like that has now freed up the proper space to take a run at Tyler Bertuzzi. Before it was, hey, we'd really like to do it, but unless we can find a way to offload Taylor Hall, that won't be possible. Now, Hall, he's just a luxury the Bruins couldn't afford. $6 million. Production down a little bit, was injured last year as well, and just a cap hit that for a guy playing on your third line wing, $6 million is a little rich for any team, let alone one jammed up to the cap like the Boston Bruins are, especially with the bonus overage heading into next season. So they had to do something to free up space. Mm-hmm. They've done it, and now Bertuzzi seems to be in their sights to really try and keep this team together. But even watching the NHL awards last night, should be a big reminder to everyone watching Patrice Bergeron collect his 6th Selke trophy that a lot of the Bruins offseason still hinges on the idea of, is Patrice Bergeron going to come back next season? What about David Krejci? And if both those guys aren't back, what do the Boston Bruins do down the middle to support their team?
Well, like, getting the money off the books is great, but you're right. If decide on Bertuzzi until you know about Krejci and Bergeron, because if those two come back, bargain deals, right? They're probably going to do the same thing they did last year with the heavy hometown discount. If they don't come back, like, you can't go into next year with Pavel Zach and Charlie Coyle as your 1-2 down the middle.
Well, not to expect to compete for a Stanley Cup. And that's what the Bruins expect to do with David Pastrnak, Hart Trophy finalist, Hampus Lindholm, the guy who, by the way, I voted number 1 on my Norris Trophy ballot. All those ballots will be released shortly. And they've got a lot of other cap gymnastics to get through because they need to figure out a landing spot for Mike Riley or buy him out. Derek Forbort's name has been floating out there. Matt Grzelcyk is available. They're considering a lot of different options, and Don Sweeney trading Taylor Hall to the Chicago Blackhawks was the first way to rip off the Band-Aid for the Bruins.
Be interesting to see how Boston kind of handles that. Just quickly on the flip side of this deal, heading into this offseason, or when they won the lottery, you looked at that payroll in Chicago and it was like, you have one forward making more than $3 million, and it's Tyler Johnson. Now you got Hall. They re-upped Athanasiou. They got Nick Foligno done there as well. This was the plan for the Hawks, right? It was to get some good vets to surround Bedard with.
Yeah, and they also, you mentioned their salary cap. They had to spend to get to the floor. And so to be able to surround, someone like Connor Bedard with a Taylor Hall, give him a support piece, give him someone that's won a Hart Trophy in this league, maybe someone that he can lean on in terms of even just navigating his way around the NHL. Taylor Hall has been a top draft pick before. He gets the idea of what that pressure is like, can help him in that situation as well. So the Hawks, I think, are going to be pretty quiet here along the rest of the way. They may be in a spot where they could take on another contract, but they seem to be getting a lot of business done already to this point with some curated selections. Foligno, a guy that they think can provide leadership and some grizzled veteran status in their bottom 6. And then let's see what else unfolds.
Let's move along and recap what we saw last night at the NHL Awards.
By the way, real quick, I should mention, one of the first things a couple teams had asked me in the moments after the trade was, do you think there's any chance that the Chicago Blackhawks would wield their cap space and flip Taylor Hall, retaining half and making him a $3 million player? I would imagine that would have interested a team like, I don't know, the Edmonton Oilers. But alas, nonetheless, I'm told that the Chicago Blackhawks have zero interest in trading Taylor Hall I don't know, check back in a year when he's got 1 year left.
Makes sense. Awards recap. Connor McDavid cleans up but doesn't win unanimously. Frank gets milk poured on him. Hilarious.
Needed to clean up. Yep.
Jim Montgomery had a great acceptance speech for his Jack Adams Award win. The Bruins actually kind of cleaned up as well. You mentioned
They
Bergeron
should.
winning
They were the
sub.
best regular season team in history.
Allmark grabs a Vezina as well. Those are just kind of a few of the headlines off the top of my head. What stood out to you on awards night?
Honestly, I thought they did a really good job telling some stories. You know, even something like it doesn't get a lot of love every year, but the Bill Masterton Memorial Trophy means a lot to us at the PHWA. But to have someone there to tell those players' stories, to listen to P.O. Joseph tell about Chris Letang and what it was like to room with him and live with him and see the work that he puts in. Clayton Keller's doctor to talk about his snap femur.
Really cool,
I think there were some little things in there that were just nice touches. And then even something like Connor McDavid, we know he's not going to light the room on fire with his personality. So when he comes up to give him the heart, you bring in the Stelter family who comes in from Edmonton. Awesome. Ben means a lot to Connor, and to surprise him like that and have him just, turn around and the family's there. I just thought it was really well planned out and a lot of nice touches. A lot of people groaning on social media. I feel like you can't make anyone happy there. And look, if you're not angry, you're not doing Twitter right. But people are saying, oh, it's cheesy, it's long, it's whatever. And it's like, it's an NHL regular season award show. Like what are you looking for?
Yeah, award shows are kind of meant to be a little cheesy and whatever, family friendly, I guess.
And milky and cheesy.
Yeah, I do think it went a little long. Like you could do it in 2 hours, probably pretty easily.
They did do it in 2 hours.
It was a little bit longer than that.
Yeah, 2 hours and 7 minutes. I think before they tried to first during the pandemic, they did an hour.
Yeah. And
then they were like, okay, let's get back to somewhat more normal. They did an hour and a half and it was tough to fit everything in. Now 2 hours, people are bitching.
Yeah. Slam dunk to keep doing it in the same city as well as the awards, or is it?
I think that makes sense. But someone said to me last night that they heard that the awards are going to be here for the next few years. I did not hear that, but I think that they should just do them always in the city. Like the fact that they did it in an arena this year, which is something that they normally don't do. That to me, it looked really good.
Yeah, it looked great.
Nashville knows how to throw a party too.
Yeah, the stage on Broadway, the vibes were immaculate in Nashville last night. It's really cool to see.
A little hot.
City. Yeah, it's a little hot, sure, but it's cool to see the city kind of dress up for the NHL awards with the logo and everywhere.
To get everyone show up, all the different country music artists. I'm a big country music fan. Jelly Roll's my guy. So I was backstage for a while. I've never asked anyone in my life for a selfie, and that was the first guy I was actually thinking about it, and I just chickened out.
I can't believe you didn't. I was bugging you about that last night.
Yeah.
You can ask for pictures, Frank.
I know. I feel like
you can meet your heroes.
I know, but I don't. First off, I don't want to disappoint. And second, which I don't think it would have. But second, I hate being that guy. Like I don't want to get in anyone's way. So
yeah, no, that's fair as well. Let's get back to the hockey talk here and kind of look at what could be coming in the next 24, 48 hours as we lead up to round one. And then, even day 2 of the draft sees a lot of movement, but the Winnipeg Jets are a team that everyone in the hockey world is watching very closely. They have all those guys in the top 5 of your trade targets board with Scheifele, Dubois, and Hellebuyck. Kind of what's the latest? I'll start with Hellebuyck. I'm surprised we haven't heard more about this. A guy who is a perennial Vezina contender is clearly on the block. Why hasn't there been more interest in Connor Hellebuyck?
Because, and not just from a trade acquisition standpoint, but my big question that I've been asking myself over the last week has been, okay, it's great that teams like Connor Hellebuyck and crave that consistency in net that maybe really only 5 or 6 netminders in the entire league can provide you that kind of security as you put your head on the pillow if you're an NHL GM. The thing for me is, who can afford to pay him $9 million for the next 8 seasons or whatever the number ends up being on their cap? I think the list is very small. And I also think that because Connor Hellebuyck, by virtue of the situation that the Jets are in, Hellebuyck, Scheifele, to a lesser or maybe to even a greater extent, Pierre-Luc Dubois, who we'll talk about, they control the trade destination because no one's going to trade for them without knowing that they can sign them. So I think the pool is already pretty small for the Jets, but then for the Jets to extract significant value from that, it's going to be really difficult for Kevin Cheveldayoff to pull off.
Pierre-Luc Dubois obviously has a lot of value. You said you wanted to touch on him. You know me, I am chronically on Twitter. I am always refreshing that thing. I keep seeing LA and then Montreal's in the mix. Oh, Montreal's not in the mix. LA is in the mix. It's close. It's not close. Cut through it all. What's going on with Dubois?
So to my understanding, the Kings and Jets have been doing this dance for 5 days now. And does it come to a head today? Potentially. I think it heated up a bit yesterday. But at the same time, I think there was this sort of idea out there of like, well, is there a last second? Does Pierre-Luc Dubois really want to go to Montreal? Is that his preferred destination? And what are the details surrounding that? I can tell you the latest from what I know is that even though the door is open and even though you can't count the Montreal Canadiens out, I still think it's very likely that he's decided that he would like to play in LA and that it's trending towards getting a deal done, but it's not a contract related issue. I don't think they've even given the Kings permission to speak to Pierre-Luc Dubois yet. I think it's more of a trade package issue that the Jets haven't gotten to a place yet where they feel comfortable with the return for Pierre-Luc Dubois. We know they're looking for roster players. As interested as the Canadiens might be, they just don't have the pieces to send back to Winnipeg to really get them excited. And that's been one of the big hurdles in this. Pierre-Luc Dubois also controls everything. He could just say, I'm only going to the Montreal Canadiens. He could say that if he wanted to. And then the Jets and Canadiens would have to get creative. But to this point, I don't have any indication that that's the case. And it certainly seems to be trending towards LA, but not done yet.
So not on the goal line by any means, but maybe getting close to the red zone.
I would say, they're like in the red zone.
Okay.
They're at the 20-yard line.
And what about Mark Scheifele? I guess we'll wrap up with number 3 on that top 5 list as well. It feels like similar to Hellebuyck, we haven't heard rumblings of who's interested and who's taking a look at this guy. I mean, he's coming off a great season, and if the Jets are willing to keep some money, he could be a very valuable trade chip.
Yeah, I don't think the Jets are interested in taking money. I think they feel like his value is already at a surplus compared to what his cap hit is. 40 plus goals last year, coming off a career high. The center market is interesting. Like, you've got a bunch of teams out there that are looking for a center, and certainly it might fit some cap schemes too. Like, take Scheifele and put him on the Detroit Red Wings.
Yeah.
And say, okay, he slots perfectly under Dylan Larkin now in terms of cap hit. And then you can bump Kopp down to the third line or have him play on the wing. And Scheifele and Kopp, of course, would have played together at some point. So that's one team that I think is out there. I think the Dallas Stars, they don't really have the cap space, but are interested in that center market. Columbus, I don't know that he's destined for Columbus because, again, you've got to re-sign the player. That's the other part of this. You're not trading for this guy unless you're re-signing the player. So certainly something to keep in mind.
Interesting stuff. Jets all over the top 5 of your trade targets board. Let's play a little matchmaker with the top 5. We might bleed into the top 10 a bit if we have some time. But Aaron, if we could flash up the board with the top 5 again. Jets dominating this thing. We talked about them enough. So I guess the name I'll go to is Kevin Hayes, who comes in at number 3 on the list, the first non-Jet matchmaker for him. Feels like St. Louis is a good fit here. Is that still the spot, or who else would you maybe have there?
No, I think kind of go back to the trade market I just mentioned. St. Louis, is there a possibility that they rework a smaller deal just solely centered around Kevin Hayes with the Flyers? There's the potential of that, but I think that, it's back to square one essentially for the Flyers right now. So Dallas and Detroit were kind of the only other 2 teams that I saw that were potentially in the mix and fits. And you have to consider, a bunch of people have sort of yawned at the idea of Kevin Hayes, but 25 goals, 55 points, you can kind of pencil him in for that, plus the penalty kill, plus the complete player. So at $4 million, even though it's 3 years, let's just call it $4 million in a retained salary transaction. That's become attractive to teams. There's a lot more teams that like him, but can't afford him.
Initially, like we were just talking about Scheifele, you mentioned Columbus, but you got to sign the player. And then I go, okay, well, Hayes has terms. So if you're Columbus and you're like, oh, we like Scheifele, we'll be able to sign him. Go get the guy with term.
And who's going to cost you a lot less.
Cost you a lot less. My only thing is we know Hayes and Torts aren't a match. Are Hayes and Babcock going to be a match?
That's why I didn't really include the Columbus Blue Jackets. If they were going to make that trade, they would have done it when they did the Provorov deal, and they didn't. And I think at this point, like, it's probably pretty unlikely that Columbus gets back in the mix.
It's nice to have my takes validated by you, though.
Yeah.
I like when you back me up like that. Number 5 on your list is Alex.
We could be friends.
Yeah. Number 5 on your list is Alex DeBrincat. Matchmaker for him.
Everyone's been pointing to the Detroit Red Wings. I also think there's a number of teams out there that are kind of interested in what that mix might look like. I think, they don't really like to pay market value, but I could see DeBrincat being a fit in a place like Carolina. I also think there's a couple that are sort of just slow playing this with the Ottawa Senators. You heard Pierre Dorian at his press conference today. Not only did he mention that Coach DJ Smith will be back, but also saying, look, DeBrincat is not going to agree to a long-term deal, and it's essentially forced their hand to trade him. They have the hammer of the arbitration filing that, the Sens have put into place, but that's just kind of a stopgap solution. It's like, hey, that allows us to retain his rights, and this is how we're going to play it from here. Seems like it's heading toward a trade, but I think the Sens are probably pretty disappointed. This day last year, or tomorrow last year, they were essentially getting this guy for a number 7 overall pick and second and third. And they're like, man, this is someone we're going to have for a while that they haven't been able to close.
Can I throw you my wild card matchmaker?
Do it.
The Seattle Kraken. Could they be itching to make a splash this week after coming off such a successful year? Do they have the taste of winning and now they want more?
I do think they have the taste of winning and want more. I just don't see them. I think they like the cap structure that they have. I don't see them having someone come in and blow that out of the water. And more to the point, like, I hate the idea of scouting with a tape measure, but I think there's also plenty of teams out there that are not really that interested in an undersized winger that puts up a lot of points.
Fair enough. Yeah. There you go. That's your top 5 matchmakers. We'll dig into some more trade targets tomorrow. Big day, obviously, with round 1 of the NHL entry draft. We're live on the Daily Faceoff YouTube. We're looking for inbox questions, so make sure you drop those in there with the hashtag AskDFO. But now let's get to our big segment, a hit that was confirmed on the dance floor at Tootsie's last night. Let's bring in Pete Blackburn. Pete Blackburn from Bally Sports coming in to talk about draft week. Always a good time. Usually a lot going on in these next couple of days, Pete. Give me one team you're looking at and going, they're the most interesting team. That GM has the chance to make things spicy on the draft floor.
I mean, you guys just did too much on the Winnipeg Jets, so I won't hammer that home. But obviously that's an intriguing place with all the names that are linked and trying to move out of there. One of the teams that I think that is really, really interesting is the Detroit Red Wings, just because of how much capital they have and kind of them wanting to make a move. And me and Frank have talked about it where, the Detroit Red Wings have been so patient about rebuilding that team. But at some point, you got to make your move and you got to be aggressive. And there are a couple of guys out on the market that they seemingly are very interested in terms of forwards. And, DeBrincat's probably like at the top of that list. But what about William Nylander? If that becomes an option, if DeBrincat goes off the board, like William Nylander would make a lot of sense in Detroit as well. And they have the assets to go get him. So Detroit is a team that I think could make a pretty big splash if they really, really want to in the next 48 hours.
Pete, who's a team out there that, we're not really talking about making a splash, whether it's the Toronto Maple Leafs or, the Minnesota Wild Stars, someone out there that had a legitimate chance to win the Stanley Cup. The Oilers, I would include in this category, have a chance to win the Stanley Cup next season that you'd like to see be as aggressive as possible this week.
Dallas is a big one because, Dallas obviously made a decent run there. I think that they have a lot of the pieces that you look for in an actual Stanley Cup contender. But I think that they can do a better job of still continuing to bridge that gap in terms of the old core and then the new core. And I would like to see them add a little bit to the new core. And, maybe, a top 4 defenseman in Dallas would be huge for them. And, we talked about Ryan Suter and just kind of how he's lost a little bit there. And I would love to see them add on the back end if they can get a top 4 defenseman. I know that they don't grow on trees, but they have an ability to go out and make a splash to become a team that could legitimately be a Stanley Cup winner next year if they capitalize within this window.
It's a unique week here because free agency is going to come like 48 hours after the end of the NHL draft. Usually we have a bit more of a buffer. We have Frank's top 10 for his free agents list. I wanted to pick your brain a little bit on this. Maybe give me one top 10 if we have the board available. One name in the top 10 who you're looking at and going, that's a really interesting situation. I'm intrigued to see where they land. Then give me another name who's maybe your buyer beware pick. Someone you're looking at and going, they might get paid, and we might be sitting here in like 2 or 3 years being like, buyout.
Well, I mean, honestly, I think that my answer to that question, to both of those questions, is the same name. Tyler Bertuzzi, to me, especially being a Boston guy and seeing what they shipped out Taylor Hall, to me, like that signifies them trying to free up money to keep Tyler Bertuzzi. But I would also slap a buyer beware on Tyler Bertuzzi, where like in three years or so, like they could be in the same position as they were with Taylor Hall, where they're like, at signing, it looks like a pretty good deal, but you're kind of wanting more 3 years, 3-4 years down the line. So like Tyler Bertuzzi is a really interesting, I think that he would be an upgrade over Taylor Hall for this Bruins team right now. And I do think that they really want to keep him. But I would also be kind of skeptical looking at what the final number is and the term. But another guy on that list, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, is a really interesting situation because, obviously he's kind of been mocked or looked down upon because of his contract. But if he gets like a 1-year prove it kind of deal, he's a guy that could be an insane value for a team that's trying to put a final piece together.
Yeah, fair enough. Pete, always a pleasure to catch up and pick your brain a little bit on all things NHL. We'll see you on Broadway, man.
Absolutely.
Pleasure to chat with Pete Blackburn. You can find his work at Bally Sports. Frank, we're going into the inbox. #AskDFO. Zeke is in. He's a Hawks fan. He says Tarasenko should be a fit for the Chicago Blackhawks. I don't know if I see that. No, Tarasenko's outside of your top 10. Who are some teams that could be interested in him?
Trying to think of what the winger market looks like. You hear it kind of time after time. We're looking for a top 6 winger. We need a scoring winger. The problem is, I think teams look at someone like Vladimir Tarasenko, and as impressive as his numbers can be, I don't know that anyone wants to commit significant term and dollars. That I think is going to be a bit of a struggle for him because first off, he's had some significant injuries, which have all been taken care of, but he's one of those guys that has been in the league so long. You're like, he's only 31.
It's weird, right?
But
it feels like he's 35.
It does. And it's kind of the same thing with Ryan O'Reilly, who's 32, I think. So it's an interesting spot for those guys. It's like, what kind of term they're looking for? Like, I'm betting 4 or 5 years if they can get it. Mm-hmm. But what are you realistically willing to give him?
But the upside here is, I mean, Aaron, if we could flash up the top 10 again, like he's not in here, but how many of the guys in this list have 40 goal potential? Like there's not a lot, right? Like Tarasenko can still pop you home 30, 35 at least,
he's in the 30 range for sure. I don't think anyone's looking to say he's going to get back to 40.
If he went somewhere with an elite center, would your jaw be on the floor if he was in the high 30s?
No.
There you go. That's all I'm saying. It's an interesting one. What about JT Comfort? What's the market going to be like for him? And maybe what's the latest on him in the Avs? Are they still talking after the Johansson deal?
Yeah, I think they're sort of, at least in contact still. I think it's probably a little bit unlikely that they can afford to keep him now, given all the roster pieces that they have to fill out. But the market is pretty strong, but it's all interrelated to all those things that we were just talking about. Scheifele, Hayes, and then if you don't land one of those guys, then you're probably going to pay a little bit extra premium on the market to get JT Compher, who is looking to cash in with probably the biggest deal of his lifetime.
Nick Perry is in, Islanders guy. He wants to know if there's any truth to the Josh Bailey trade rumors and maybe what's Lou getting up to this week.
Again, the only God and Lou know category. I would say a lot of the talk that's been out there about Josh Bally, if anything, I think more of a buyout candidate than a trade candidate. There just aren't really many teams out there that are saying we want to take on dead cap space and all, not dead cap space, but take on a bad contract. It was kind of the Hawks, who I think are more or less done unless they get an offer that knocks their socks off. You've got the Flyers potentially. Will the Flyers do business with New York? Being in the same division, I guess they could if the New York isn't worried about them. And then the other team, it's not the Arizona Coyotes. They're not doing that anymore. No. The other team is the San Jose Sharks. Does Josh Bally make any sense for the Sharks to pick up an asset or two? Maybe, but I think you'd have to really entice them.
His buyout's not terrible. His cap hit would drop down to 2.6 this coming season. It's currently at 5, and then it would come with a $1.16 million penalty in that second year. But if the cap goes up significantly, maybe you're okay kind of taking that hit. When does the buyout window close again? Friday
at 5 p.m. Eastern. You'd have to go on waivers by Thursday.
Okay, so we will have a bit more info.
So 3 more days. There was no waiver activity today. You got Wednesday and Thursday before getting there.
Let's move along to our Betano daily bets. Our friends at Betano.ca got all the odds up for the NHL draft. There are a lot, but I've scrolled through and I've picked out a couple more I like. Yesterday, we were talking about the goalie market, maybe betting on getting plus money on a goalie to go in the first round at Betano. Today, I have a couple more, but it's more geared towards the top half of the first round. We had Stephen Ellis on yesterday. He gave us some insight with his mock draft. And here are the 2 plays I got. The first one, Zach Benson over 10.5 overall. So betting on him to go later than 10th overall. Ellis had him going 12. We're getting plus money on this payout as well. So even if he goes a spot earlier than Ellis has him, there is a chance that a team in the top 10 falls in love with him. But
yeah, someone takes him at 8 and all of a sudden you're hooped.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the risk. Plus money riding with Ellis having Benson over 10.5.
Not for me.
You think someone in that top 10 really
No,
likes him?
I don't have a real good view of things past like 6 or 7. And I would say, like, for me, I just don't know enough to place the wager.
Fair enough. Dalibor Dvorsky, his line is set at 8.5 overall.
I would take the under.
And that's what I had here. The payout's not great at minus 180, but I mean, yesterday when we had Ellis on, there's talk maybe even as early as 6 as well. So to get a couple picks of buffer room, there's a couple of plays on Betano.ca that I don't mind for round 1 of the NHL draft, which goes tomorrow here in Nashville. Not physically here in a room that's called the Shag Room. But
no shagging in here.
Shagging in here. That is actually just the name. There's the shag on the roof. But let's wrap up the show with a little bit of garbage time, Frank. What do you got?
Yeah, speaking of draft order, how about everyone's intrigued as to where Matvei Michkov ends up going? And the fascinating part about this draft is that prior to this week in Nashville, no one's really been able to get their hands on this player, not just to see in person with viewings, because Russia has essentially been closed off to the outside world, but no one has talked directly to Matvei Michkov. No one had interviewed him until yesterday here in Nashville. And so there's been all kinds of nefarious speculation out there, and rumor have been running rampant for months.
Yeah.
Won't get into all the details as to what or why, but he was sort of painted out, at least the chatter in the industry was to be this negative influencer force and bad guy or whatever it might be. And all I can tell you is some of that's just draft and hype and speculation of, teams that are trying to suppress it. And there's all sorts of, take everything you hear with a grain of salt at this time of year, because you just expect that people are lying to you. But just wanted to share with everyone, from some of the teams that did interview him yesterday, the response was very positive and they felt like they came away impressed. Just one interview with a translator. You're not hearing it directly from his mouth. You're maybe always curious, like, was the translator just feeding you what he was told to? Again, to continue with the nefarious speculation, but just point saying that the teams were impressed, and I'd be curious to see where this goes from here. But perhaps if we were really just grading the player and not where he's from or the socio-political or whatever else is going on around him, the contract, people have said this is a risky pick. I just don't think there's any risk at all.
My point has been, listen, are you going to have to wait 3 years for him? Probably.
You might, they might save you from yourself.
Might save you from yourself. Also, if you're a team like a Montreal or a San Jose, and you know your rebuild's going to take a few years, think of the boost of the first 3 years of Matvei Michkov on his ELC when you're just starting to be competitive. An insanely good thing to have on the books.
That, and also like think about the impact of Kirill Kaprizov. I know that's a guy that was taken way later in the draft, but people view him as a very similar talent to Michkov. And so when you consider that, if you could add that type of player to your organization 3 years from now, I think you take every chance you can get.
Yeah, I think I don't know if this is the right word, but like the folklore around Matvei Michkov just kind of got out of control.
Just from like the like suspicious death of his dad to like all these other things that have unfolded. People have been saying and spreading rumors that I think are just not true. And that is like the subterfuge that you can expect when it comes to NHL draft week.
Are we going to get a big move by the time our show goes live tomorrow at noon Eastern?
I think we're going to have at least one trade today, potentially more. I just think there's enough percolating out there that no one really wants this to linger much into Wednesday if they can avoid it, especially if it doesn't involve high picks. Get your business done.
Our pal Nick Alberger was rocking someone make a trade Golden Muzzy tea today. Let's hope he gets his wish and we got something to chew on tomorrow. Thanks to everyone who was active in the YouTube chat. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. We'll have a ton of stuff coming up here over the next few days on the Daily Faceoff YouTube, including a new edition of Daily Faceoff Live tomorrow at noon Eastern. We'll chat with you then.
Thanks for tuning in to Daily Faceoff Live. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.